It's 100 hours of
100
non-stop
hours
coverage.
of non-stop coverage here on CNN News 18. We'll be going live through the night, through tomorrow, and of course tomorrow evening is when the Prime Minister will address the UNGA. But tonight is the big night. It is literally the business end of his trip to the United States, because in a little over a couple of hours from now, Prime Minister Modi will have his first ever in-person bilateral meeting with US President Joe Biden. This is going to be at the White House. A lot of issues will be on the plate. The whole range from climate change to COVID diplomacy, and of course the big elephant in the room, and that is how to deal with an assertive China. They will also, of course, talk about what's been happening in Afghanistan after the Taliban take over there, because India, remember, is in this region. It has huge stakes. America has botched up an exit plan, but the brunt of it has to be faced by countries in this region. And later tonight, the leaders of India, the US, Japan and Australia will be meeting for the first ever in-person Quad summit. A coming together of nations who are on the same page. They have one objective, and that is how to deal with a growing China, whether it is in the political realm, whether it's in the economic realm, and of course whether it is in the military/security realm. We're going to have every detail covered here in our special 100-hour non-stop coverage right here on CNN News 18.
When the issue of terrorism came up, she asked Pakistan to take action so that these groups do not impact on US security and that of India.
The suo motu reference was made by Kamala Harris with regards to Pakistan, and that she said that Pakistan must take action.
In just a few hours from now, Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden will be holding their first ever in-person bilateral meeting. This is their first meeting since Mr. Biden assumed office earlier this year. In fact, the situation in Afghanistan, given the recent developments there, China's interference in the Indo-Pacific and its quote-unquote almost bullying behavior with smaller countries, that's going to be on the agenda as well. And of course, the need to counter terrorism, because India has had a bugbear with Pakistan-based terror groups using the soil of that country and targeting Indian assets and Indian nationals. All of these issues are likely to dominate the agenda. And of course, there are important issues as far as President Biden is concerned, whether it is climate change, whether it is tackling the COVID aftermath. Earlier today, Prime Minister Modi met with US Vice President Kamala Harris. During that meet, Kamala Harris suo motu referred to the role of Pakistan and Pakistan-sponsored terror actors who are operating from that country. In fact, tomorrow, the Prime Minister will be addressing the United Nations General Assembly. That's going to be at 6:30 p.m. India time. But like I said, tonight is the big night, the business end of his trip to Washington, as it were, because he will be speaking with both Joe Biden in his first in-person bilateral, and also after that, the first ever in-person Quad summit. I want to first go across to White House reporter for CNN, Jeremy Diamond. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Let me start off with what's first on the agenda for both Prime Minister Modi and US President Biden. They're going to have their first in-person bilateral meeting in a little over 2 hours from now. What is the view in Washington? How is the Biden administration looking at this meeting? Do they see this as, let's say, an opportunity to reset the Biden administration's foreign policy priorities, especially so after the recent events and developments in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think that this meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, as well as the broader meeting between the Quad leaders this afternoon at the White House U.S. time, it is all in keeping with the theme that we have heard from President Biden over the course of this week as the United Nations General Assembly has been taking place. And that is to say that all of this is in many ways about the United States pivot to Asia, which of course we've been hearing about for years, but has really taken on a new meaning with President Joe Biden. And so I think the United States certainly views India as a key partner in that effort to counter China's growing influence in the region, its military buildup, and certainly that Quad security dialogue is going to be a big part of that conversation when the leaders of the United States, India, Japan, and Australia all gather together at the White House this afternoon to have that conversation. But certainly there's going to be a number of things on the agenda between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, everything from the fallout from the war in Afghanistan to the coronavirus pandemic, climate change, of course, central, and even perhaps semiconductors, because we know that that has been a big issue in the United States, and there's been some discussions with India about increasing semiconductor manufacturing. So a lot of issues to discuss between these two partners, and of course it's notable that this is the first time that they will be meeting in person.
All right, and like you said, the Modi-Biden bilateral, which is in the first half of the day, will be followed by the first ever in-person Quad summit between the leaders of India, the US, Australia, and Japan. And let's say, for want of a better phrase, the elephant in the room, or the dragon in the room, will be China and how to deal with a growing and assertive China. Yet at the same time, all of these countries will have to be wary of not naming China and growing and assertive Chinese behavior. So how do they walk that fine line?
Yeah, I think what's notable is anytime you see a statement from the Quad, for example, or when you saw, for example, last week, that new alliance between the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, that security partnership, none of those statements ever actually explicitly mention China, but China is always very clearly the source of these partnerships and these security dialogues that are increasingly taking place. President Biden has made no secret that he views China as an increasing threat perhaps in the world, although as he did say earlier this week at the United Nations, he made clear that what he is not seeking is a new Cold War, which is something that China has asserted in relation to this Quad partnership, in relation to these other military partnerships that the United States is developing. But what President Biden said is that ultimately what he is looking for here is not conflict, but competition. And he made clear that that competition will be vigorous, it will be real, but what he is claiming at least is that he doesn't want to see this blow out into conflict. Now, there is certainly a tension here. Not every member of the Quad, I think, is on the same page about how aggressively to confront China, but that will certainly be a topic of conversation during this meeting this afternoon.
And interestingly, since you mentioned this new alliance, AUKUS, some would say rather clumsily worded, but AUKUS with Australia, the UK, and the US, and coming as it does, this new security alliance, the announcement of which happened last week, and this week now we have the first in-person Quad. How is Washington viewing the distinction between these two groupings, as it were? Because the view here in India, at least for some people, is AUKUS has taken some of the fizz out of Quad. How does Washington see the distinction between these two groups?
Yeah, well, I spoke with a senior administration official yesterday who made very clear that the Quad is an unofficial gathering. It is an unofficial security dialogue between these nations, which encompasses far more than military issues. In fact, primarily non-military issues, including technology, other kinds of strategic discussions on trade, on free passage, free maritime passage. AUKUS is being billed as a much more formal security partnership between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. And I think that the White House views these two partnerships as complementary rather than in competition with each other. And obviously we'll have to see how the discussions develop this afternoon. Notably, two members of the Quad, the United States and Australia, are in that trilateral security partnership with the United Kingdom as well. So again, I think the White House views this as complementary partnerships, but also with a distinction in the sense that the AUKUS partnership is a much more formal security alliance, notably giving nuclear-powered submarines to Australia. The Quad is perhaps intended for different purposes and a broader security dialogue. Of course, military-to-military competition isn't the only thing that the United States is worried about when it relates to the Indo-Pacific. They're also worried about a string of other issues, including cyber security issues, trade issues, etc.
All right, Jeremy Diamond, I want to thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. with all those details and, of course, your perspective to what is going to be a very, very important day diplomatically for India, for the US, and, of course, Japan and Australia. But let's just delve a little more into detail as far as what is the difference between these two groupings, AUKUS and, of course, Quad. AUKUS is a military alliance. It's between primarily Anglo-Saxon countries, the US, Britain, and Australia. Just got announced last week. The Quad, though, is a much more broad-based, much more expansive grouping of countries, non-military based. That's India, US, Japan, and Australia. The idea of which was floated back in 2007 by former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. AUKUS is a purely military and security alliance, and the big headline there in AUKUS is the fact that the United States will be providing Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. That's like a complete game changer. The Quad, on multiple occasions, including just 2 months ago when Secretary Blinken was here, he spoke to me. He said he's very clear. Quad is not a military alliance. India is also very clear. Quad is not a military alliance. Let's roll further. The focus as far as AUKUS is concerned is on the Indo-Pacific and a very narrow sort of focus containing China militarily. Remember, China has been, running bombers past the Taiwan Straits. It's been running ships in the East and South China Seas. It is to deter China from doing that, quote-unquote, bullying or hegemonic behavior. Quad, on the other hand, has a slightly more expansive range, whether it's trade, whether it's climate change, whether it's vaccine diplomacy. It's not narrowly just constricted to a military head-to-head, as it were, with China. And then finally, the AUKUS actually expands defense ties, primarily between these Anglo-Saxon countries, the US, UK, and Australia. Remember, it's not just the US providing nuclear-enabled submarines, but also the British will get to park some of their submarines in a base in Australia. So in a sense, they're really beefing up Australia's attack as well as defense capabilities. The Quad, on the other hand, like I said, will focus on a whole range of issues, whether it's trade, whether it's maritime cooperation, climate change, COVID diplomacy, the works, if you will. Australia, of course, will get, by virtue of being a military ally, a treaty ally of the United States, Australia will get access to high-end US military technology. India is not an ally. India is a strategic partner, so India does not get access to US strategic tech. And as far as the Quad, like I said, is concerned, there is so far no talks whatsoever on any kind of defense ties. And this is as much true for India as it is for Japan. Yes, Japan has a treaty at the end of the Second World War whereby the United States is treaty bound to defend Japan. But again, it's not a military ally of the United States. So let me now bring in our guests. We'll also be going across to Maha Siddiqui, our Foreign Affairs editor, who's joining us live from Washington. But first, let me go across to our guests. Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, is joining us. Sushant Sareen, senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Praveen Swami is group consulting editor with Network 18. Jonah Blank is a former policy advisor to Joe Biden and a foreign policy expert at the National University of Singapore. And Gopal Krishna Agarwal is national spokesperson of the BJP. Praveen, I'll start with you. Please explain to our viewers in as layman terms as possible the difference between AUKUS and Quad and why you believe that AUKUS doesn't take away anything from Quad.
It's quite a simple difference. AUKUS is, though we do not have the benefit of a treaty text as yet, and we should not draw conclusions till one is available, it seems to be a straightforward military partnership between three countries which already have mutual defense treaties with each other. So Australia has an existing alliance partnership with the US. Britain has an existing military relationship with the US. And these brings these two alliances together with the evident, or so far, with the evident aim of bolstering Australia's submarine technology and thus adding a layer of deterrence against China in the South China Seas and beyond. The Quad is a very different arrangement, though there 3 of the 4 countries have a treaty relationship with each other. India doesn't, and has historically not wanted to be bound into a treaty relationship with any other country or a mutual defense relationship with any other country. The Quad seems to be, as you said, a much wider conversation about things ranging from COVID to economic decoupling and less of a military partnership, though it clearly has a military element including mutual exercises and so on and so forth. Now, where the Quad heads, there has been a question mark around. It's been tested solely during COVID. This is presumably going to be at the top of the conversation that these leaders are going to be having in the United States.
Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, one of the things, and I'm sure this was a question mark even when you were in service, why are we reluctant to shed our inhibitions as far as greater cooperation with the United States, specifically in the realm of military and security is concerned? I mean, frankly, there is a big view, even within our defense forces, that AUKUS and the fact that the Americans are providing nuclear-enabled submarines to Australia is a complete game changer. Whereas India will never have access to that kind of technology, despite being, a strategic partner. The 21st century belongs to us, and so on and so forth. Great words, but ultimately, when it comes to brass tacks, the Americans have chosen who they are enabling.
Well, that's a very deep question, as usual. But to give a little historical background as to why we, in the Foreign Office, for example, were hesitant to go full steam ahead, because America kept on changing its partners. First, it was Pakistan, starting from Dulles, who was the CIA chief. He went to NWFP at that time in 50s and saw Pathan horsemen from the army riding big horses, and he was so impressed that these are the guys who can be our military allies. From that moment onwards, the American-Indian relationship, despite desire by the people from both sides, has stumbled. Despite desire by people like Kennedy, it has stumbled. It has never recovered from the phobia that America is really an ally of Pakistan. And England has played a mischievous role all through in this. Then, of course, in 70s, it was China which came in. And once China came in, China and Pakistan got into a relationship which was winked at by America by defying all kinds of international norms, whether it was on transfer of missile technology or nuclear technology. So it caused heartburn to India. That hesitation still remains, largely because, to give a recent example of AUKUS, America has readily agreed to supply not just the nuclear submarine, which is a huge commercial gain for America and partly to Britain, but also in future nuclear technology for submarines to Australia and high-end defense technology to Australia. Whereas we have been denied all this. We've been given commercial deals worth about $20 billion over the last few years, mainly to America's benefit, slightly to us also because we've got some good equipment. But the fact is that these hesitations have always stumped the relationship, which otherwise should be on a smooth course.
All right, Gopal Krishna Agarwal, again, we don't want to take a very narrow view of Quad. Obviously, the canvas for Quad is very, very expansive, from climate change to COVID diplomacy, emerging tech, which is turning out to be a huge issue, whether it is cyber attacks and so on and so forth. So yes, it's great. The canvas is much wider. Would India rather be seen in such a grouping? Because taking on China is not just a military or a security problem. It's a gamut of issues. And if this is a non-military alliance, as has been very clearly defined by both the US as well as by India, then India would rather be seen as in that grouping rather than directly take on China, despite the fact that, right now, even as we speak, we are still being militarily confronted in eastern Ladakh. I mean, that thing has been going on for the last year and a half now. But we would rather be seen in a more political grouping or an economic grouping, if you will, a grouping of like-minded countries, as opposed to just a narrow security/military alliance.
Rightly, Zakat, you have said it very correctly, that India's security interests are not only aligned with US. We have our security concerns or alliance with Russia, France, and there are other countries across this region. So the thing is, that what we need, because there is a difference between what Australia and US relation on the security concerns are. But India's security concerns have a larger perspective, one thing. Second thing is that we have much better and good relations with US on the economic and business front. America is one of the second largest country with we have a big trade relation, bilateral trade, and we have a very positive trade relation. So with under the Quad is more suitable that we have larger perspective on it. We have business alliance, we have climate concerns also are being taken care of, and particularly we have to be not seen just in militarily aligned with one country or one group of countries. That's also an important consideration. So I think we have very good relations with US, but our security concern and military and defense relations are very good with France, Russia, and other countries also. So we have to balance on that count.
Okay.
That's
I know Sushant Sareen has a different view on this, so I'm going to come to you, Sushant, because now an argument that's being put forth is now that the French are so upset with this AUKUS that's come through, there's an opportunity for India to deepen its defense ties with France. There's also the fear, as Rajiv Dogra and Gopal Krishna Agarwal said, historically, the fear that, our cooperation with the Russians, and we are deeply dependent even today militarily with the Russians for spare parts and so on, that may get hindered if there were a deeper engagement with the United States. Do you buy these arguments?
Only in part, Zaka, not entirely. Look, we might have an opportunity with France. We've had opportunities with France even in the past. But let's just stack up France with the United States and just do the comparison. While I'm very fond of the French, and I think the French have been excellent partners of India, they've done a lot more for India than, at least in the last 20, 25 years, than even the Russians have done.
Yeah.
Even so, when you have to weigh these relationships, I think the United States will outweigh all of these other countries. Number one. Number two, where is it written that because you enter into a closer, even an alliance relationship with the United States, as many other countries have done, you cannot have either defense relationships or other kind of economic and other political relationship with other countries, which might not be in the American sphere. That is what the art of diplomacy is all about. Now, our problem, however, is that we want free lunches. And what I mean by that, and I know I'm being a little harsh on that, but what I mean by that is, there is this constant thing. There is no technology being transferred to India.
Yeah.
Number one, I have said this earlier and I'll say it again because I think it needs to be repeated time and time again, that there are only two ways of getting technology. One is developing it and the other is stealing it. And we are not ready to do either. So we have a problem out there. Number three, look, if you want to get into a relationship with the Americans, then there are certain things you will have to do to be part of that alliance relationship, which the Australians are ready to do, which the British are ready to do, but we have a bee in our bonnet and we are not ready to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Ambassador Dogra keeps talking about, our relationship with the Russians and how the Americans have been very undependable. But let's face it, we had a major socialistic hangover or rather obsession under Pandit Nehru, which is why he wanted to reach out to the Soviet Union. He saw that as the future, not the Americans. And this socialistic, thing, which is there in this government as well. I think we need to get real on how modern economics is going to work. We need to get real on how international treaties and alliances are to work. We need to get real on how technologies which are being developed. Forget about military technologies. Let's talk about the technologies, the critical technologies, 5G and other stuff which we are talking about, space, 5G, and the other stuff which we are talking about in the Quad. It's not going to come to you free. How far are you willing to go for it? So we need that clarity in our own minds, in our own policies. If we don't have it, we will simply be talking about this endlessly but we will not be coming up with the kind of solutions which we need. The last point I want to make is,
quickly, please.
I think we need to show a little bit of confidence in ourselves that we can enter into these relationships with the bigger players and still hold our own. There are other countries which have done it, and there is no reason why India cannot do it. But if we are going to be always diffident, we are always going to be trying to protect ourselves against something which might happen because something happened 400 years back, then, you'll keep doing what you're doing.
All right, Jonah Blank, the view here in Delhi, you may say it's an uncharitable one, is that to have this AUKUS alliance, a military alliance, and obviously it's game changing. It changes the battlefield altogether, as it were. Like I wrote for a piece for News18.com the other day, bringing a nuclear-enabled submarine into the Indo-Pacific is like somebody brought a submachine gun into a pistol fight, right? It changes the whole game. To do that a week before Quad, and yesterday what Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said, we don't see Japan or India coming together with us or being a part of AUKUS in any form of military or security alliance because we view it differently. How can this sort of gap or this view be sort of bridged? Because there's clearly a difference in view in how Washington sees these alliances and how Japan and India see these alliances. Because at the end of the day, we are the folks here in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, if you need a big power to confront China on its bullying behavior, it can only be done through the Indian Navy or the Japanese Navy.
Yes, well, I very much agree with Praveen Swami's interpretation. This AUKUS really is nothing terribly new. The United States already is treaty allies with both Australia and with Britain. Already, it has gear that is interoperable. It's very easy for all three of these partners to work together because they're operating the same hardware and operating it in the same way. Beyond that is the fact that the US, I believe, would be quite happy for India and Japan to join AUKUS, but India, as Praveen notes and as Ambassador Dogra notes, is not interested in a military alliance with any nation or any sort of formal alliance with any nation. Now that's India's complete sovereign prerogative, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. But it's just not possible under U.S. law and not feasible under any nation's system of alliances to treat treaty allies and non-allies in precisely the same way. If India wants nuclear submarines, I'm sure the United States would be very happy to provide and possibly might not even require a treaty alliance. But treaty allies are, by virtue of the fact of treaty, treated differently.
No, fair enough. Just very quickly before I take a break, when the civil nuclear deal was being discussed, there was a one-time waiver that was made for India, and the US sort of went out of its way to procure that waiver. Doesn't the same extend in the military realm as well? I mean, if the US so wants, it can share this tech without India being a military ally.
Yeah, this is not an NPT issue, and we should be very clear here. We're talking about nuclear-propelled submarines,
correct,
not nuclear-armed submarines. Right. Australia, unlike India, is not a nuclear weapon state. Australia has vowed repeatedly that it will never become a nuclear weapon state. So these are two very, very different things. If India decided it wanted to have nuclear submarines, that would not be a violation of the NPT. And India would be quite free to purchase or even to have tech transfer, at least in some degrees, from whichever country it wished. Okay. However, nuclear submarines are extremely expensive and rather complicated, so they're not just a prestige item. They have to actually meet the security requirements that a country actually has.
Fair enough. All right. I'm going to take a break on this note. I'll request all our guests to stay on. We've covered the eastern flank, at least from India's viewpoint, but the western flank. And there are a couple of interesting developments that happened there when Prime Minister Modi met with Kamala Harris. We're given to understand, certainly from the Indian side, that it was Kamala Harris who suo motu referred to Pakistan needing to do more against terror groups that are operating in that country. And also finally, I guess finally, this is perhaps the fourth or fifth US president who's finally realized the double game that Pakistan has been playing. That's why, so far at least, we've seen a cold shoulder from Joe Biden to Imran Khan. We'll talk about the Western flank right on the other side of this quick break.